Okay, I'm going to suggest we start now because people will arrive while we're doing the introductions. So fantastic. Okay, thank you and welcome to everyone joining us here for this round table, which I should mention is being sponsored by Dassault Systemes. Okay, so think of them when you next have money to spend. Today we'll be talking about the role of AI and data and machine learning in innovation there. But first, let's go through our panel. Darren, if I could get you to introduce yourself first, just quickly.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Darren Green. I'm Director of Molecular Design at GSK Stevenage and a Senior Fellow here. My relationship to sort of AI, machine learning, is I lead our Bradshaw Automated Design Initiative.
Okay, thank you, Darren. Sean, you next.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'm Sean Eakins, CEO of Collaborations Pharmaceuticals, and we're a small company based in Raleigh, North Carolina, focused on using machine learning to really augment our drug discovery expertise in both rare and neglected diseases. I have over 20 years of experience in applying machine learning to both ADME-Tox and drug discovery in both pharmaceutical and consumer product space.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sean. Leo.
Thanks, Paul. My name is Leo Bleacher. I am the Director of Life Science R&D, doing development on AI-based tools for drug discovery at Dassault Systemes. My background is actually as a medicinal chemist, but I've been working in the software area for about 20 years.
Fantastic. Thank you, Leo. And Eric.
Hey, my name is Eric. I'm Associate Director of Data Science at the Novartis Institute of Biomedical Research based in Basel. I lead the Basel team where we apply machine learning and AI to basically the entire drug discovery process. And my own background is in computer science and Bayesian statistics.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Eric. Okay, so leading off with the question here, which I'll throw open to the panel, can you actually give us some examples of how AI and machine learning might be useful in innovation or in pharma? Who wants to be brave enough to throw themselves forward first? Eric, you actually mentioned a paper during rehearsals, so I'm going to pick upon you.
Sure. Actually, I think the paper you referred to is one that has been published by NIBR, by my company, on the 10 simple rules to power drug discovery with data science. And I didn't participate in writing this paper, but still I think it's a very good read that establish very, very simple rules to basically engage data scientists in the process of drug discovery. And perhaps I can just start with the first of those 10 simple rules to get the conversation started, which is really about establishing data science as a core drug discovery discipline, just alongside, chemistry and biology, and give data scientists an equal seat at the table, and also engage them very early on in the process.
Fantastic. Thanks, Eric. Now, has Sean dropped off? I can't see his screen there.
I'm sure he'll be back.
Okay, he absolutely will be, I'm sure. How dependent we are on network. I should actually just realized I forgot to introduce myself, which is terribly remiss. I'm Paul Agapau. I'm Director in Oncology R&D at AstraZeneca. I'm not natively a computer guy or a machine learning AI guy. I was immunologist and biochemist back in the days, but what can we say? It's much easier to work on a computer, isn't it? So I will throw my own hat in there to say that, one of the advantages of AI and ML, at least as I see, is that, of course, pharmaceuticals is ultimately a data-driven industry or a data-driven sphere. So these are tools that lend themselves very naturally towards that, particularly in systems that we don't fully understand. We don't understand what the models are that are underlying them. So we can try and compensate for our ignorance, if you will, by throwing more data at the problem and having the machine learning systems sort of solve them out. although to date, I think it's quite true that we've mostly been devoted towards looking at the early end of the development scale and at early dev and at candidates and targets, and we're still catching up on the late, which is where I think a lot of the benefits are there to come. So Leo, would you like to have a crack at this problem?
Yeah, well, I think the question is an interesting one, right? In large part, AI or machine learning, I think it's probably best to say, has had the most success in early drug discovery, where the questions are relatively simpler in the sense that the systems we're trying to simulate are more fundamental, right? There are fewer interacting pieces when you're just talking about a binding event or some relatively simple at the molecular scale event, rather than the interaction with a whole host of systems where you would need a systems biology approach. You need a whole organism to be simulated in order to get a reasonable result, or to be modeled in order to get a reasonable result from a machine learning approach. So my opinion is that today, even though lots of progress has been made in making clever machine learning techniques and getting the most out of lots of data, we're still at the state where we want to try to make models of things that are as simple as possible. So that's what we've been trying to do, with the software that we've been developing, is try to aim it at areas where we think it's likely to have a success, and try to keep it in the earlier stages. But again, I think it is an interesting question for the panel, and maybe some of our audience will have thoughts on the topic, but it's interesting to think about how we get into these more challenging areas where ultimately the drugs are going to have to behave in the full system.
Okay, no, good observation, said Leo. So I've often said that, in some ways we've tackled the low-hanging fruit, as it is, of the machine learning world for pharma development. As you say, you have, I hate to say that it's a reasonably simple question, but it's much simpler early dev than late dev, where further you go into development, the more complex the biology is. And so naturally our victories have largely been in the early as opposed to later on in the scale. But anyway, Darren, would you like to chip in?
Yes, I'll add another angle on where you've been going. I think one of the reasons that people have started in discovery and have obviously had good success is the data sets available in discovery tend to be the volume and the quality that you need for model building. I think there are lots of challenges as you go later in the process, certainly around volume, sort of not so much volume if you're talking clinical data, but have you actually got the data you need? I think it's a big challenge. Whereas in the discovery phase, as you say, slightly more directed problems, and you do have the data that you need to build the models. And in some respects, I guess we're being a little bit incremental with our adoption of, you've got problems where in my field, we've been building QSAR models. The world's been building QSAR models for over 100 years, actually. And so in that respect, the latest machine learning techniques are relatively incremental. Nonetheless, you can find techniques which really do offer a significant benefit over what we were doing before. So I think we have some very concrete examples around property prediction, around chemical reaction prediction, molecule generation, these sorts of things. And then I liked what you were saying around the fact that you get in complex systems and needing to supplement our failings as humans in terms of how do we understand that data by generating lots of it and allowing an algorithm to look at it. And I think high content screening, I think imaging, those are really nice examples of where people are using deep learning techniques to extract information out of those screens, which is very, very difficult for a human to do. So you go beyond what the species can do, actually.
That's it. That's what AI is all about. Okay, Sean, you're back with us. Would you like to leap in?
Yeah, sorry about that. Good old technology, right? I think definitely from our side, more of the success has been just scoring libraries of compounds, which is pretty mundane and boring, I guess, to an extent. But the success is really applying the technologies, I think, and then making something out of the molecules, as opposed to just sort of doing it as an academic exercise. So I think just trying to find things that have been missed before is kind of something that we can do over and over again with AI and machine learning. And I think that's something that would be, most people would find it incredibly boring, but we can just set the machine to do it. And so that's something that I think is definitely a win. If it takes some of the, sort of things that we don't want to do out of the way, take it out of the equation.
Okay, well observed. Yes, kind of almost the commoditization or the routinization of everything in there. So, well, so just quick one for the audience there. We've popped up some poll questions, so if you'd like to vote upon those, we can see what opinions come in on there. So we're all of accord that AI is the way to go and so forth, but how do we get there? How do we get from a vice president putting something on a slide at a conference and saying, yes, we are becoming data-driven and data motivation, to actually use it in our day-to-day work? I certainly have my own experiences that, there is a gap between the talk and the action. So, what is it that has to happen there? Is it a question of technology? Is it a question of culture or whatever? Leo.
I think that's a deep problem, right? I think that the worst part of it is the hype cycle. So if you're talking about the gap between the expectation and the reality of what ML can do for you today, I think is large, and it can overwhelm the work, right? So I think that the trick of it is to, at the same time, point out how significant the small things that ML can do, right, that the machine learning can do, some of the things that Sean was talking about finding what's been missed and looking at where are the gaps in the data that we've already generated and what would be interesting to still do within the realm of where we've gathered information. Yeah, it's not maybe that sexy, and it may not sound like much, but when you actually go and look at how much value is generated by that kind of activity and how much cost is spared by not doing it in the real world, but by doing it in the virtual world, if you can actually do it right, that's where you can bring together kind of what the reality of what's possible today with something that's worth putting on a slide by a vice president, and keep them from getting out of control. That makes it easier to meet that reality, I think.
Yeah, I think you made a good observation, a good phrase in the prep for this. We were talking about data as a core asset, which I guess is what you're getting out there, in the sense that it's not buying something in that will do a particular task. It's how it expands your capabilities, and how even a failure can be a data point.
Sure.
Which I think goes back to something that Sean hinted at, the gap between academia and industry, where a failure in academia is going to be shoved into a desk drawer, but it could actually be something that's quite profound in terms of if we're looking to go down the AI route. So I'd like to throw this also to Darren and Eric there, kind of in the guise of big pharma and AI. What do they see the gaps as having been?
Sure. Okay, thanks, Darren. So as was said before, I think the first change, and that's one that's happening now, is a culture change. And as you just said, I think the importance of realizing that the core asset of the company is the data it generates, successes and also failures. And first of all, coming to this realization that the data needs to be organized in a way that it can be further used by people like us, by data scientists, I think is the first change that needs to happen for AI to be enabled in pharma. this is a change that's happening now, or probably has happened already in many places. At Novartis, this is something that started a couple of years ago, and that is going at full speed at the moment. So that would be the first step, in my opinion. I don't know what you think, Darren.
Yes, I think if I look back at the GSK journey, first thing that actually GSK did was we established a data center of excellence. And that was the realization that we needed to start treating our data as an asset, to propagate all, good practices around data, standardization, metadata, and all these things, which, we're still working on. This is a big challenge in a company that's got a very large, long legacy, of older data and practices and so on. But I think that's an essential first step. And that predated our later investment in, in a core AI ML team, actually. So GSK was get the data sorted, and then add the machine learning on the top of it. You're right around the culture. I think that there has to be a realization that I'm a big critic, actually, of our belief in human intuition. I think it's, particularly in drug discovery, I think we're going to prove that the machine can do it better. But that's a cultural thing that many of us are brought up on, and many of the practices are, around that, decision-making practices and so on. And culturally, that's a difficult one to shift. So you have to be very focused on what you go for, because there's a lot of energy needs to be put in to showing and proving the proof of principle.
Okay. Thanks, Dan.
So I think that's a really interesting point about human intuition versus what the machine will come up with. In my experience, human intuition is indeed quite fallible, but it needs to be replaced by something, right? When you have a machine that's going to make suggestions, it needs to have some basis from which it will draw its next suggestion, right? So the nice thing about intuition is it gives you that certainty and clarity of purpose that you sometimes have a hard time getting out of a machine. So where do you find that clarity of purpose from your AI tools?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the way that I think about it is you can be very objective about what you do with a computer. It can be very systematic, as Sean was saying, much more systematic than a human. And in a way, you can brute force your way out of the intuition thing. So if you take molecule generation, for example, idea generation, humans are good at ideating that. But the machine learning algorithms generate orders of magnitude more ideas in a far shorter time. And if you then modify your process so that you're putting your scoring schemes together, you're doing all of these things in an objective way, it changes the way that you actually approach the problem, in a way that you're moving away from the intuition-led approach and you're going to a more systematic and objective evaluation. So that's the way I look at it. You can obviously bring the two together. You need the human ideas, because I think one thing we haven't touched upon, at the moment, machine learning algorithms aren't very good at mechanistic thinking, where humans really excel at mechanistic thinking. And any problem that involves that kind of thinking, that the human intuition is very valuable.
Okay. No, I happened recently to read Novacine by James Lovelock, 100 years old, responsible for these inventions and so forth, and he repeatedly harps on intuition as being the way to solve everything. And that was just one of many things that was wrong with that book. But anyway, now that we've returned to that, I think actually that's a good point to turn across to interpretability, perhaps, and the idea of risks in there. So, what what are the risks, or what sort of risk management do we have to do when we're using AI and machine learning? And, you know, is interpretability a real issue, or is it a canard? Sean, I think you've got a lot to say about this.
Yeah, I don't know if I've got a lot to say about it, but definitely the interpretability of models, it's a challenge. I mean, we definitely, as a small company, don't have the legacy of having to deal with historical data. But on the other side, we also have relatively young, inexperienced employees. So how they interpret the models, as opposed to how a medicinal chemist with 20, 30 plus years experience would interpret them, are totally different. So I think that's part of the challenge you have in a company nowadays. The level of experience with both the drug discovery side, if working on the small molecule side of things, and then also the experience of historic data. And what we've done in the past with machine learning over the 20 odd years, you know, how it's advanced and the expectations for the technology and what it can and cannot do. And interpretability of the models is definitely something that, you know, we just didn't really have, I guess, when I started doing machine learning. And nowadays, you know, we have so many metrics on top of just the prediction that we have to consider as well. Not only the space, you know, where that molecule may sit in the property space, and then, you know, thinking about that data set alongside potentially thousands of other data sets that may be available. It's definitely much more of a complex challenge nowadays. Considering, you know, 20 odd years ago, we had so little data to model anyway that, you know, just pulling together a few molecules to build a model was an effort in itself. Nowadays, we have, you know, much bigger data sets, many more sources of data. How do we interpret one model in the context of many? How do we interpret one model for one property when potentially we could build maybe tens of models for one property, depending on where we get the data sets, whether that's internal, external, collaborator data sets, etc. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I mean, how much weight do we put on interpretability of the models, as opposed to just using them blindly as a black box, right? So I think there's definitely more of a difference in a mindset there, a modern difference, depending on whether you have the experience or not, if you're looking at it kind of naively. I don't know, I think maybe that's a little bit too philosophical to think about it that way, but I mean, as someone that's, you know, getting on in age, I feel kind of middle-aged. I've gone through a few different phases of machine learning and modeling. We've seen what it can and cannot do. We've seen all of the different efforts that people have tried to hype it up before. I think this is probably the fourth time that I've seen a good amount of hype around machine learning. I'm still not convinced that it's going to be the savior of the pharmaceutical industry. But obviously it's come a long way. And we still have, I think, a lot more to do in terms of convincing people. I mean, we still have very skeptical medicinal chemists that are around, and other scientists, you know, that just don't want to deal with it. And obviously they're, you know, getting to that point in their careers where many of them are retiring, right? And this could be the next paradigm, right? We're clearing out the naysayers, and all that will be left will be the next generation. And the technology that we have now going forwards, you know, this generation will be using this as their benchmark, their gold standard, and everything after that, you know, will be an improvement, right? So I think that's definitely going to be a good thing for the pharmaceutical industry, you know, how this new younger generation approaches using these technologies going forwards. You know, and a lot of the old fuddy-duddies will be out of the picture.
Everyone who disagrees will be dead.
Well, I don't know.
That's all of us.
Right? They'll be playing golf or gardening or whatever they do, right?
Maybe Eric too.
And I think that's kind of something that, you know, if you've been in the game for long enough, you've seen those people, and now you'll see them fall away. And so yeah, it's just a classical paradigm, right? I mean, it's, you know, out with the old wood, and, you know, the new generation will drive it forwards, and that will likely be more technology driven.
Okay, Leo, would you like to? Oh no, was that you, Darren?
Sorry, I was just chiming in, saying Planck's principle, isn't it? It's a scientific idea. Do not triumph, but their opponents die out. That's
it is. I was trying to think of the name of that. You're quite right. So what about the broader risks? I mean, people can speak about interpretability if they wish or so forth, but I mean, what are the broader risks of AI and ML and adopting it? You know, is there, you know, the issue of overselling it in a sense, or what else?
So it's interesting, the point I think about interpretability. I think interpretability means different things to computer scientists or machine learning experts and bench scientists. What we've heard from a number of the customers that we've been engaging with is that they're less concerned about interpretability as far as what's going on inside the model, as much as they are interested in what question is being answered by making this particular molecule. So if your system, so the system we're building is one that's designed to suggest what molecules should be made next in lead optimization, right? And so when we talk to people about this, they say, well, I want to know, why did the system suggest this molecule? I don't want to just be told, oh, well, it's going to be great. That's not an answer, right? But the interpretability as far as, well, this particular bond has a higher score than that particular bond is also not so helpful. What they really care about is, what is the question that you're trying to answer with this particular modification to the compounds that we've already made before? So where are the changes? Which of the models that have been built are they predicting, is this molecule predicted to be better on? And how is that going to help us make better molecules in the future, right? So how are we going to be confident that the results of this are going to extend to the rest of the work that we're going to do? Now, as probably many of the participants know, both on the panel and in the audience, Dassault and its predecessor companies, in the guise of Pipeline Pilot, has a huge long history in different kinds of metrics for what you might call applicability domain calculations for machine learning models, right? At the molecular level, when is it appropriate to use a particular model on a particular molecule? Or when are you just getting an answer that you can't rely on? So we've tried to incorporate all of these things to make it clear what question it is that the machine is going after, and prevent the machine from just optimizing one thing further and further and further.
That's an interesting take. I mean, of course, I'm not going to say struggling, we're dealing with this problem inside AstraZeneca at the moment, and you know, the usual technical solutions are trotted out, like, you know, SHAP values and Lyme and so on and so forth. But I agree with you that in some sense those are not actually answering the base question. You know, it's more an issue of almost of trust. You know, how can I trust this answer? Is this answer what I think this answer is? And actually, to loop back to the technical side, you know, models can often be very sure of their conclusions while being completely wrong. So I think there's a lot yet to be explored technically in this area by looking at things like conv-hole solutions and so forth, that basically they'll signal if your model out of bounds, you know, that if it's delving into its area of ignorance, if you will. But okay, Eric, have you got anything to add here?
So a lot of what was said on interpretability resonate a lot with me. I think interpretability and the risk associated with not understanding what the model is doing, I think depends quite a lot on where and when in drug discovery you're applying AI. Where I would argue that for some projects, it's totally fine to have a black box as long as you can test results of what the machine is doing. In other parts, you want to understand really everything about it, why it predicted this bond and not this one, or why this particular gene sensitizes this cell line versus versus not. And so really, it depends a lot on the project. It's not that different from human experts that, in my opinion, are very often black boxes in their own rights. And they can't really explain to a non-expert why they would come to a conclusion or not. Just perhaps something to add to the risk aspect, two things. First of all, in many aspects, in many domains, sorry, I think the term of augmented intelligence is probably better than artificial intelligence. And having a system that will prioritize things for human experts to look at is often a great win, in my experience. And you don't need the machine to be always right. You need it to be right more often than it's wrong, just to be able to trim down a list of 1 million things to 100 or whatever, that human experts can really look at and potentially also learn new biology by looking at what the machine prioritized. Yeah, that's in my opinion, something that's especially valuable, for instance, in histopathology, where you can design a machine that will automatically flag areas of pathology slides that are outliers in any sense, and then have human pathologists look at those areas and decide whether they're interesting lesions or if they're just artifacts of images in another way.
Yeah, much like Sean suggested earlier, like automating the boring stuff. Yeah, it's a good thing. I'd just like to remind the audience, you can put in your questions into the Q&A function on the Zoom, and we've also got some poll results back here, just which I'll recap the summary of the first part of that. When we're looking at, what is your level of AI, fortunately only 14% of you said none, so that puts you ahead of most of the people in the executive suite. But we are just starting, 31%. We have some expertise, 31%, and we are quite proficient, only 25% of you, so that's quite humble. And as for what you consider the most important for your AI projects, data was overwhelmingly the thing that people picked, 47%. The questions themselves, 31%. The algorithm, 17%. And the people, us poor people, only at 6%. So there we are. If we might go on to possibly, quite on point or interesting question, at least not an entertaining one. What are the bad applications of AI? Okay, what are the things that we shouldn't be doing, or where it's been misused? Darren, I'm not reflecting upon GSK by asking you this, but I'm putting you in the hot seat.
Okay. And this one actually relates to what we've just been talking about. I think there's a really good example in the reaction prediction space where somebody published some work where they trained a machine learning model on the basis of some reaction data and it went off and did some predictions and whatever. Basically it turned out, looked like that work. The machine learning algorithm seemed to have learned everything about the experiment except the chemistry, and it was predicting other things. And so, it's a good example of where you can really mislead yourself by you've got a good model, but it actually hasn't learned what you wanted to learn. And so it's difficult then to extrapolate from it. And in that case, actually, that's a great example of where working on interpretability and attribution in machine learning is great value to the data scientist. So, well, actually, I'm training my model, but what is it learning? Is it learning the right things? Even looking at the headline metrics can sometimes be fooling yourself. I've also seen in the chemistry space, which is mostly where I work, where actually, deep learning isn't the right solution to that. You actually creating problems yourself. There are better solutions in the old cheminformatics space that you could be using. That it's fashionable. You'll get a paper published by taking a deep learning approach, but actually it's probably not as effective as what's already out there if you just went and read the literature and picked up an algorithm from 20 years ago, to be honest. So, you know, that's just fashion.
Yes, absolutely. Leo.
Well, I think I would agree with Darren that you do need to be careful about what the properties are that the machine thinks it has learned from. That's definitely worth checking on if you've given it a large menu of things, more than just a chemical structure. I think the other thing that you need to be careful of and this is, I think, reflected in one of the questions that was asked, is who's interpreting the results. So if you just have data scientists interpreting the results, people who don't understand the domain in which they're working, you are likely to run into trouble. So that's probably an area where you don't want to be using AI, right? Where you're asking data scientists to do something that's outside the realm of their expertise, and they don't know whether the answer they're getting is reasonable or not. So, you know, in the reaction chemistry area, right, you might have the system making suggestions that a synthetic chemist would immediately reject out of hand for good reasons, that a data scientist is simply not going to realize, oh, these are not appropriate solvents, or this is going to explode, or, you know, these things are going to react, right? That these are the basics that they don't know, and it's not their job to know. So the point in the question, experts with combined expertise in the domain and the data science areas, I think is really the key to not making those kinds of mistakes.
I recollect that some of the AI generated, you know, drug candidates were notorious for coming up with molecules that couldn't be synthesized, or like physically could not exist, because, you know, a side branch would kind of carve through the main backbone of the molecule. But yes.
Yeah.
Eric.
I think we've conquered, if I could just say one more thing. I think we've conquered those kinds of fundamental flaws in what kinds of molecules are going to be suggested these days. But I do think there's one other area where we still are in danger that I'd like to get the panel's thinking on. And again, this gets back to something I was talking about earlier, where you have multiple physical or chemical mechanisms underlying the thing that you're trying to model. This is an area where I start to, again, worry about whether it's possible to get an extensible model, right? One that's going to actually be useful beyond the very narrow set of training values. So I'd be interested to know what Eric or Sean think about, you know, how often that kind of problem crops up.
Yeah,
it's a good question, Leo. I mean, if I was to just briefly attack that, I would say that, you know, at least in the infectious disease side of things, we've had a lot of success with, you know, modeling wholesale activities as opposed to just going after targets, individual targets. So I think that would take into account the multiple mechanisms. I mean, that was at least the first thing that popped into my mind as soon as you said that. That would be my way to address it, at least from the infectious disease side. You know, if you have no idea then what the mechanism of the molecule is, but that kind of approach would be one way to, you know, build models around those kind of data sets and try to find molecules. I don't think it would help you tease out what the mechanism is, but yeah, maybe I've flipped it around. But that would be one way I would kind of think about that, you know, where you can model molecules with multiple mechanisms and you really don't think about it. Yeah, and it definitely has a lot of disadvantages.
Leo. No, sorry, not Leo. Eric, sorry. It's Eric's turn.
So I agree with Leo's comments about having models that extend beyond their initial training sets. I think, again, this is a problem that has different orders of severity depending on the stage of drug discovery. The later you are, the more of a problem this is, in my opinion. And it's actually much harder to validate complex AI models, or actually this is even true for simpler machine learning model. It's harder to validate them than we think. We've seen like big fiasco outside of drug discovery, but for instance, in face recognition with huge gender or race biases, while those models were built by very smart people who are like true international experts in machine learning. But they just failed to realize the amount of bias that was in the training set. And now when you deal with biomedical data that is that has hundreds of thousands of dimensions, very often you have very little chance to test and to detect bias in your training set. And so you have to be very, very careful at testing and validating over and over again with data sets that your system has never seen. When you're very early in the drug discovery process, for instance, the example of high content imaging screens was taken earlier, then this is much easier because you control almost perfectly the experimental setup. You can generate almost infinite number of images in relatively cheaply and relatively quickly. So you can really test and validate very quickly. And there you control about everything. So the risk is definitely much bigger when you want to apply your system to the real world. For instance, I'm not aware of a system that's currently able to enroll patients for a clinical trial. And for good reasons, because this would be extremely difficult to guarantee your system is not excluding patients that would actually benefit from treatment. While we have now dozens of very, very good systems that have been published in the best journals to analyze high content imaging data very efficiently.
Okay, we might move on then to the next point, which is how do you build a team with the right mix of data scientists, domain experts? You know, it's apropos to turn to our poll results here, where we've asked what are the most important aspects or experts of your AI teams. Data scientists 25%, domain experts 8%. Ouch. Experts with combined expertise 67%. But is this not just placing a burden upon our personnel to be good at everything? I'm thinking of, and this is in a slightly different domain, some years ago it was an NIH position paper on what they needed for bioinformatics in the future. And when you added together all the skills and everything that your typical bioinformatician needed at minimum, it was 3 degrees worth. And, you know, and they were experts in biology and in maths and stats and computers and everything. And at that point, of course, you would say, why would this incredibly brilliant person not just go and get a job for much more money somewhere else? So how do we bring these teams together? What's the magic sauce? Darren?
Yeah, okay. So I guess we've got examples of two ways of doing this. In my space, in chemistry space, obviously there is that long history of machine learning. So you do have the luxury of people that do have combined, you know, domain and technical skills. You tended to have grown them. They don't, you know, just come out of university very often. The ones that do are, you know, highly valuable. But you do, you know, by having that longevity, you're able to grow and get a resilient team. So you can, you know, I would say, you know, you're deliberate about the people you look to employ. I think you're absolutely right that the people that have all the skills in that one person are very rare. So you plan your team and say, right, what do we need in the team? You look for those skills and be patient, you know, really wait for the right people, because you know, it's very easy to disrupt a team by hiring the wrong skills in. So, you know, I think that there's that. GSK has also built an AI ML team, a core AI ML team from scratch, and that was done, you know, by hiring the leader. So, you know, going out and finding someone to lead the team, and then using his connections, his name, you know, allowing him to then really build the team that he wanted. So that's sort of two different ways. One's more bottom up in an area where, you know, you're doing this, and another one's top down where it's, you know, AI ML team, although they're focused very heavily on biology, that team is going to be looking at big problems, so you're looking at a slightly different flavor of team there. So depends what you want to do.
Okay, I see someone has put in the chat a question. I think you've basically answered, how easy is it to find and recruit experts in the field as per your own experience in building your center of excellence? And you've said, it's a long process. I know that at AZ, certainly it's difficult. The whole world is competing for these people at the moment, and we have had to recruit people from outside the field, astrophysicists, fintech people, so on and so forth. And you do get interesting, diverse people, but you have to make sure they're connected to the domain. So, you have, you grow them into the area, you coach them, you teach them. You have people like myself who are basically domain whisperers, as it were, to partner with them and help them along. Sean, what you've been through 4 waves, you said, of machine learning. So what's your aspect on this?
Well, I guess the 4th wave is really just taking relatively young scientists. As a small company over the last 5 years, I basically took the approach of hiring master's level chemists. And most of them didn't have any cheminformatics expertise, and so they basically had to learn on the job, both data curation and machine learning. So for me, it was really just to have that core expertise of the chemistry, right? To know what a structure is, to know how to draw structures. I think it's a lot easier to do that with a chemist than a biologist. So that was an important starting point, and I think also to have relatively young mindset to approach this. Obviously an understanding of what it means to build these kinds of models, and then how to use the data. And then the other aspect of the team was really to bring in people on the biology side that could do the validation. So I think that for me was important. I didn't really have that luxury of being able to bring in the AI expert. That was, I guess, me. But the technology that they could start with, it had to be something that was accessible. So we were working with someone that was able to put a tool together. It was all scripted, command line. So all of these people became pretty much experts over a very short period of time in how to do that. So for me, it was really the chemistry expertise that was critical. The machine learning, the cheminformatics, the background, they had no idea about the history of the science, where it was going, where it would come from. And I think that's also important. You basically started from a blank slate.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really thought about it before, but it's actually probably good to do that because they don't have any legacy idea of what technologies could do before. And you're pretty much basically driving the direction that you want the technology to go to achieve a goal, right? As opposed to saying, right, there's all of this great stuff out there, go pick the best. No, we're just going to pick this one. This is what we're going to build. This is how we're going to do it.
Okay, no, focus. That's interesting. Yes,
Yep.
there was an article recently. I've forgotten who they're interviewing it, but someone in the AI drug space who was arguing that it was easier to teach computer science, data science, AI to a biologist than it was to teach biology to a computer scientist, which I somehow intuitively feel to be true. But I'm not sure whether I'm just bigoted because I'm a biologist or whether I suspect there is something about biology. You learn to live with kind of uncomfortable, complex, messy data and ambiguity and being pessimistic. And that perhaps coming from pure data background might not prepare you adequately for the realities of kind of drug development. But I'll throw that one out there. Eric, would you like to say something about this?
Yes, sure. I think it's changed quite a lot in the recent past. So like 5 years ago, I think in our team we were almost everybody was like a traditional computational biologist. So some kind of quantitative background. We had like statisticians, computer scientists, also physicists, with some exposure to biology. And now I think we're expanding the team, and we are expanding the team, and we are looking for people with for instance, image analysis expertise, which we were not before. People who are able to hit the ground running with the latest AI techniques. And to go back to the poll and whether it's important to hire purely, let's say, quantitative people or domain experts or someone with a mix, as you said, it's impossible to find someone who knows everything about the three domains. I think for me, a data scientist is someone with some statistics, some computer science, and a little bit also of domain expertise. Of course, not to replace a proper biologist, but someone who can understand and speak with collaborators. Because again, I think the most important is to embed the data scientist directly in the core business. So in this case, in drug development. And I'm kind of skeptical of, we also have the same at Novartis, but having the center of excellence completely outside of the disease areas are good for some types of projects, like fix the search button in the intranet of the company, great. But they're not the one, in my opinion, I might be wrong, they're not the one who are gonna find the next oncology drug. Because those people need to be embedded with oncologists, with medical doctors, with chemists, with biologists. Even if they don't have a very deep expertise in those domains, they need enough to be able to communicate efficiently with those people.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're running out of time, so I'm just going to hurtle through the last bit of it here. And this means that we're now down to the sticky point of how you calculate return from investment for your AI data science initiatives. You know, how do you justify the spend that you need for here? And I've noted on the poll, we say, do you measure the ROI of your AI projects? And it's yes, 22%, no, also exactly 22%, and no, but we would like to learn, 56%. So Leo, what have you got to say on this?
So this is, of course, an important problem for a software company that's trying to sell ML and AI tools to our customers, right? This is one of the key questions that we get asked all the time. And so we do have a number of different types of metrics that we have put together over the years for how you're going to evaluate what you did not do when in the course of getting to whatever ultimate stage it is in your drug discovery project, right? So if that is preclinical candidates, or if it is targets, or if it is an analysis of images in a high content screening method, the question that you have to delve into is, what did we not do that we would have had to do in order to achieve this milestone or this endpoint? And then that then translates in some sort of discounted way into what is the actual spend avoided, right? So that's one aspect of it, is just a very simple, very mechanical calculation of what did we not do and how much did it not cost us.
Okay.
So that's concrete, that's nice. And then of course there are more conceptual and more difficult to calculate kinds of ROI that talk about what would we not have thought of at all had we not, my dog wants to answer this question, had we not had these tools at our fingertips, right? And so there you have to be a little bit more creative in trying to figure out what kinds of answers would you not have thought up at all had you not had these kinds of tools. And then again, you just need to apply some sort of discounted rate to that sort of thing.
Okay. Good. Okay, so we have 3 minutes left now. So we go on to the big end question, which is, where will the industry go for the next 3 to 5 years? What are the hot new developments? What should we be paying attention to? Sean.
Wow, it put me on the hot seat, Paul.
I'm hoping you'll all fill up the space before the end, so I won't have to say anything.
Well, I think part of it is, if we look into the tea leaves, right, what's been happening over the past couple of years and where is it going? Definitely there's a lot more of a shift into the recurrent neural networks and the GANs for generating molecules de novo. I mean, I definitely see that there's a lot there that can be exploited, right? You know, that's been moving pretty rapidly for the last few years. So I think there's going to be more of that, and the moving into the space where, you know, the person is out of the equation, right? We've got these algorithms doing so much. They're taking all of the information from all of these different data sets and basically coming up with which molecules to make. And I think that's probably where it's literally going to go, to the point where, you know, you just feed these algorithms with as much of what you've got, and they do the multiple optimization, and they basically come up with, these are the options to make. And we do have a better handle on, you know, how to make these molecules, right? And so they're not so crazy. You know, even though a lot of these folks who are putting these things out there, they tend to shoot themselves in the foot by showing crazy molecules. I think hopefully people will go away from doing that kind of thing. I definitely think that's where it's going. I mean, there's so much more public information nowadays. How do we leverage all of that? But it's going to come down to the validation. We're going to be putting a lot more weight, I think, on the validation, and not just throwing these ideas out there of, you know, what can be made or how the models do. There's going to have to be a lot more experimental validation. So I don't know that we're going to, you know, see a lot more new algorithms, but I think it's going to be applying the technologies and building them and just basically showing what they can do.
Darren?
I'm with Sean. I think automation is going to be a very large feature of where we go next. You know, as we've talked about, machines are great at doing systematic things and not getting bored and working 24/7. And I think automation is a big one. The other one I'd raise is that I think we're going to be generating data that the models ask for. You know, sort of active learning paradigm, because we're going to be relying on the models. I think there's going to be a lot of emphasis on what data do we need to get, or what, you know, the model gives you an idea of value of the data. And I think we're going to see more of that.
Okay, excellent. Eric?
Yeah, I completely agree on active learning, or you can also call it back translation. So basically, you know, taking data we learn, taking data from late in the process, and developing new models based on the learning of this data. So basically an iterative process, or active learning is where it's going, in my opinion.
Fantastic. And Leo, you get the last 30 seconds.
Okay, so I think we definitely are going to see an emphasis on what we call lab in the loop learning, where the model tells you what it needs to know to make better predictions. This is something we've been working on extensively in our software to provide those kinds of hints. But I also think we're going to see people trying to do more with less data, right? So transfer learning is one of the key innovations that is allowing people to say, I'm going to learn some stuff about chemistry or about my domain broadly, and then I'm going to take the little bit of data I know about the thing I really want to predict and add it in to come up with a model that is broader than the specific data set that I have given it. I think those are two key areas where we're going to see a lot of work and a lot of progress over the next few years, and where a lot of value can be generated.
Excellent, well picked, and we are exactly on. No, okay. We have been given an additional minute. Damn it all! I thought I could just wrap it up, but I think there'll be enough to say. I hesitate to summarize this all, but I think we are guardedly optimistic about everything in AI, though there is still plenty of way to go. There's lots of culture changes and investments that have to take place. And I'd like to thank everyone for coming along today. I'd like to thank our panelists, our sponsor as well, and let's wrap it up for the day. Thank you very much.